friends, comrades. Tonight, I wanted to just start by saying that I had a very amazing experience the first night I came here, after a very dramatic experience on my journey, lost luggage, crazy visa experience. I met the man who designed this particular award, and I had a very interesting conversation with him. And he said to me that this particular award, when I was designing it and sculpting it, for me, I had within myself a reflection of all the amazing people that are doing similar work as you are. I had the envisionment of the values that you embody, that are embodied by thousands, if not millions of people across the world, who might never get the privilege to be where you are. And when he said that to me, it spoke to me that I promised him it would definitely be a part of my speech. So I will start by saying that tonight I am dedicating this award to the activists who might never be recognized but are doing equally impactful work. I dedicate this award to the activists who are in prisons, to the activists who have been persecuted in ways that we cannot possibly imagine, and particularly to the activists who have paid the ultimate price, the ultimate cost of struggle for democracy. Some activists have lost their lives, lost families, lost marriages, lost children, and we must always be cognizant of the true cost of the struggle of democracy. And depending on which part of the world you belong to and you live in, the cost might actually be higher, depending on what's at stake and the particular tyrant that is being threatened. The cost might be excruciatingly painful. We must consistently, in platforms like this, have cognizance and memory of all of these individuals, of past, present. Having said that, I will start by saying that stories are powerful. And tonight, I'm going to share with you a story, because I believe that all human beings love stories, and when I look at all of you, I can tell you are no exception. So the story is the story of a young woman. Her name is Nehanda Nyakasikana. She, in 1897, was leading an amazing protest and revolution against colonial encroachment in my country. And the colonizers, the BSAC, the British South African Company, responded violently by hanging her, decapitating her, and taking her remains to England as part of what they called a trophy of conquest. Now, to date, those remains have not been returned to her homeland. But every time I move in the streets of Harare, they have put up a statue, a monument of her to celebrate her memory. And particularly, she is remembered in our history for having said these words: "My bones will rise again." And those words became the rallying call of struggle, and particularly the struggle for our liberation and our independence. Her radical insistence to state that what she had started in her timeline would eventually be carried forward by future generations who would deliver on the promise of freedom, on the promise of dignity, but fundamentally on the promise of equality. Mbuya Nehanda was murdered, persecuted, hanged, decapitated, humiliated. But her belief and her radical insistence in her humanity is what has inspired me in my activism journey. And tonight I dedicate this speech to her, but to so many more other people, and particularly to women who, at the expression of courage, when they show up for leadership, are treated in ways like this. As I reflect on all of these stories of the past, stories that uniquely make me who I am, I reflect on my own personal present journey as an activist. Having decided to stand against the amendments of the Constitution, which were subsequently making the executive more powerful and undermining the judiciary, undermining the parliament, I found myself in a very precarious position where I was arrested. And I found myself locked up in a very filthy prison, in a very filthy cell. And I remember very clearly how cold it was and how terrified I was. But what had started as a simple effort to try and deliver a petition to our Minister of Justice ended up in a very, very unusual response for me in which I was detained, my passport was confiscated, and I had to consistently be attending court for over 2 years. Now, for me today, all the charges were eventually dropped after the state failed to prove a case. But I do know thousands of individuals in my country and across the world who are being detained and who are being persecuted in what we call lawfare, where the law is weaponized against its own citizens. In my country, we have a man, Job Sekala, Jacob Ngarivume. All of these individuals have been detained, and particularly Job Sekala, for more than a year, for standing up for what he believes in, for his political participation and speaking truth to power. And all of these stories, we find them in so many different places across the world. Now, what has been so difficult in my activism journey is the reflection on consciousness, and particularly reflecting on consciousness in the context of what is the responsibility of our individual governments to be, but also what is our collective responsibility as a world. True to say, our governments have been corrupt. They have abused human rights at a gross scale. We do know that corruption that has happened, particularly in the Ministry of Health, has denied people their fundamental right to health. Corruption that has happened in the Ministry of Education has denied thousands of children their right to quality education. We do know that clearly there has been systems of patronage and tyranny. But all of these things find a strong amalgamation in a very hostile global system that must not be ignored. A global system that has a financial architecture, political architecture, security architecture, but militates against other civilizations, making it so difficult for certain people and certain races and certain nations to thrive and to make good and also deliver on the promise of democracy in their own countries. Having talked about this in this context, I will not go ahead and give clear examples. But what I will say is that reflecting on all of this is important because it helps us to not point fingers and blame, but to also try and locate ourselves in the context of what is our responsibility to bear, what has been our contribution to the crisis, and therefore how do we redeem our power to make sure that we contribute to being part of the solution. So I will end this particular conversation with these 11 honest serving words. These 11 honest serving words have a very great significance to me, and I will explain them briefly to indicate to you what they meant to me and how they have propped me up in my activism journey, even in times when it was difficult and hard. The first word is amandla, Zulu word which means power. And I'm particularly inspired by how during the apartheid, they would shout, amandla awetu, which means power to the people. That is a radical insistence that democracy exists where the people are. And it gives us the power to be able to speak freely and to be able to radically insist on our humanity, radically insist on the rights that we deserve, which are inalienable, but also radically insist on our power to hold those who have power and that we have elected to account. The next word is reimagination. We have clearly seen that the current global order is no longer serving us as we want it to be, as it ought to do. And therefore we must begin to use our imagination to rethink, recreate a different kind of order, a different kind of global financial order, a different kind of global political order, a different kind of global security order, a different kind of global tech order, and a different kind of global order that encompasses all of these elements, that is hinged on inclusion and diversity. Inclusion of people who might not look like us, who might not sound like us, but to value the essence of their humanity and to embrace them as being part of those who will make decisions and those who help construct a future that we all want to live in. The third word is Ubuntu. And I like it when Nelson Mandela talked about it this way: I am because you are. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we are now living in a world of interdependence, where the problems that are happening in some other part of the world cannot be said to be their problem. They become our problem. If we run our companies in a manner that we exploit certain countries, we create a migration crisis because the conditions in those parts of the world are not livable, and they have to move into other people's countries. If we have industrialization that is hinged on burning fossil fuels, we create a climate crisis that makes conditions for other people in other parts of the world unlivable, and they begin to move into our countries. A clear indication of our interconnectedness, that the problems that are happening in some other corner of the world inadvertently become our problems. The fourth word is dignity. And I will not talk much about this because I have already mentioned the conversation around human dignity. Dignity cannot be ascertained in poverty. One of the most powerful things that J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, has ever said was that poverty is humiliating and it is romanticized only by fools. And I believe that those in countries, but also in the international system, that build systems and structures that manipulate the global order and manipulate the global financial architecture in a way that produces and manufactures poverty. All of those people that create human misery through their decisions and their systems, all of those individuals are denying us our dignity. And we must consistently challenge that, we must consistently speak against that, and we must consistently proffer solutions that give us an alternative. The next word is complexity. The world has become increasingly complex, and the activist of present must always remember that it is not a them against us, it's not black and white. We must recognize the complexity in the stories of those we call foes. We must recognize the complexity in the stories of the other, the stories of people who do not look like us, and recognize that there is no one single story, and that there is a danger in telling a single story, and that is what Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie would say. The next word is memory. We must not forget the past. Historical injustices must be talked about openly. Where we must compensate, we must compensate. Where we must pay reparations, we must pay reparations. We cannot undermine the pain of others that they have experienced in the past. And we must be willing to have critical conversations that build trust and rebuild faith in the multilateral system, sincerely, truthfully, and honestly. The next word is courage. And I use this word particularly because it is essential for us to take action. And for me, it is strongly hinged to hope, because I believe that it takes courage for us to be able to hope. Maya Angelou, the great poet, once said, "Courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, it is impossible to practice any other virtue with consistency." So as we embark on this journey, we must remember that those who deny us our rights can be extremely violent. Those who deny us our rights and build infrastructure that is exclusionary can be very hostile. But amidst all of these dangers, we must have the willingness and courage to still stand up for what we believe in, to stand up to the aggressors, to stand up to the agitators, to stand up to those who have a strong commitment to building systems that manufacture human misery. The eighth word is inclusion. Inclusion of youth, inclusion of women. I believe that whatever solutions we will proffer in the future must be youth-friendly and fundamentally feminist. The next word is hope. And in particular, Friedrich Schmitz once said that those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. I believe that hope is the music of our hearts. Hope in itself is what enables us to act. And those who are seen dancing in this instance are those who are taking action. And I believe that those who take action have within them a profound hope in the belief that their actions could inadvertently lead to something that is better than the present state. Hope is powerful. And I'm particularly grateful that this year's theme was, "Do we dare to hope?" Because Barack Obama once wrote a book with the title, "The Audacity of Hope," in which he personifies hope as having an audacity, a nerve. And that is what exactly it takes to hope. The audacity and the nerve. The next word is sacrifice. And sacrifice is particularly so important because the struggle has a cost. And the alchemist believed that for you to gain something in the universe, you must in turn exchange something of equal value. Everything that we enjoy, the beauties of democracy that we have enjoyed in the last decades, have been the eminent results of the past sacrifice of past generations. We, in this timeline, in our generation, must also sacrifice. We must be willing to pay the price in full to have a world that is more inclusive and more democratic. The final word is future. And I will say this, that the future, ladies and gentlemen, is coming. It is coming, and that is a certainty. As sure as the sun rises, the future is coming. But what this future can be and will be should be the eminent result of our pragmatic action, our deliberate intentions. The future of democracy cannot be a thing of circumstance or chance. It can only be our radical impression of that future through our imagination, but also our actions. P. Drucker once said that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And all I will say is that each and every one of us sitting in this room has the power to create that future. All of the activists organizing across the world are creating that future through their actions, and we cannot retire our faith to tyrants. We cannot retire our fate to individuals who are selfish. We cannot retire our fate to those who stand together organizing violence against the rest of the world. Is it possible for us to win? Of course it is. Muhammad Ali says that impossible is simply a big word that is thrown around by small men who find it easy to live in the space they have been given than to explore the power they have to change it. I believe you and I have the power to bring about the change that we require in the world. You and I have the power to radically insist on the beauty and the power of democracy. You and I are going to do it. You and I are going to win. Thank you.